Marcus Webb didn't lose his retirement to a bar in Angeles City. He lost it in a kitchen in Mandaue, one barangay at a time. This isn't a story about a scam. Not a bar girl, not a fake profile on a dating app, not some stranger with a sob story who found him online. Marcus met someone real. He stayed for real reasons, and he lost money in a way that will feel uncomfortably familiar to thousands of men who have done the same thing. Carefully. He was 57 when he moved to Cebu City, a retired civil engineer from Manchester with a plan he had spent 18 months building in spreadsheets. He arrived with £180,000 in savings, a special resident retiree's visa, and the quiet certainty of a man who had spent 31 years calculating load-bearing specifications and never once let a structure fail on his watch. The threat wasn't a scammer, it was a family. A whole architecture of obligation, packaged inside one woman who genuinely loved him, or at least something close enough to love that he couldn't tell the difference until the money was mostly gone. If this could happen to him, it could happen to almost anyone. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any videos in the future. My name is Marcus Webb. I want to be precise about that because precision is the one habit I've never been able to shake, even now, even after everything. Civil engineer, 31 years with various local councils in the north of England, mostly drainage infrastructure and road bridges. The kind of work that nobody notices until it fails, and that you spend your career making sure doesn't fail. I retired at 56, slightly ahead of plan, which was itself part of the plan. I'd run the numbers for years. I knew what I had, what I'd need, and when. That's the kind of person I am. The Philippines entered my thinking in 2018 during a 2-week infrastructure conference in Cebu City. I wasn't there for a holiday. I was presenting a drainage methodology paper to a panel of Southeast Asian engineers who mostly looked bored. But I had the evenings to myself, and I used them the way I use everything, as data collection. I ate at Carinderia stalls in La Hague. I walked the SM City Cebu shopping mall and checked grocery prices against my Manchester receipts. I rode grab bikes across the city, timing routes, noting fuel costs. I kept a spreadsheet. At the end of 2 weeks, the numbers were extraordinary. What cost me £1,200 a month in Manchester, a studio flat, utilities, food, no luxuries, could be replicated in Cebu for roughly 80,000 Philippine pesos. At the time, that was about £1,200 as well, except in the Philippines, it bought me a 2-bedroom apartment with a city view, decent food 7 days a week, and air conditioning. I went home and filed the numbers. I didn't act on them for 3 years. I'm not impulsive. When I did finally move, I had done everything correctly. I spent 2021 applying for the special resident retiree's visa through the Philippine Retirement Authority. The deposit requirement was $20,000 placed into a PRA-accredited bank account. I chose BDO, Banco de Oro, the largest bank in the country. Agency and processing fees came to roughly 90,000 pesos. I received my ACRI card and my SRRV stamp in February 2022. I hired a lawyer in La Hague before I signed anything. A soft-spoken man in his 50s named Attorney Romero, who had handled expat property queries and visa matters for 2 decades. I read expat forms for a year before I moved. I knew about the land ownership restrictions. I knew about the family dynamics. I had read the warning posts. I thought I was ready. I rented a furnished 2-bedroom condo on the 14th floor of a development in Cebu IT Park, the modern, relatively air-conditioned part of the city. A cluster of glass towers and BPO offices that looked more like Singapore than anything I'd imagined when I'd researched the Philippines. 28,000 pesos a month, about £420. My written lease was reviewed by Attorney Romero. I had barangay registration and a folder of documents for every transaction. My monthly budget was precise. 28,000 rent, 15,000 food, 8,000 transport and activities, 12,000 buffer for health, emergencies, small travel, 63,000 pesos total, well inside my runway. On the first morning, I stood on my balcony before the sun was fully up, looking across Cebu's lights, and I thought, I built this. This is correct. I had accounted for everything I could measure. I had not yet learned that the most expensive things in the Philippines don't come with invoices. I met Lenny in month 3. I want to be careful how I describe this because she is not a villain in this story, and I won't let her become one in the telling. She was at Carbon Market on a Saturday morning, the main public market in Barangay Ermita, which is nothing like the IT park, chaotic, loud, alive in a way that the condo district isn't. Stalls heaped with dried fish and vegetables and live crabs packed in styrofoam. I was trying to find fresh herbs and failing badly. She translated for me without being asked, pointed me toward the right stall, then went back to buying her dried fish. No lingering, no performance. I thanked her and she nodded as though helping confused foreigners with herb procurement was a normal Saturday task. She was 39, an accounting clerk at a logistics firm near the port area of Cebu City. She earned 22,000 pesos a month, above average for an accounting clerk outside Manila, though it sounds reasonable only until you price what life actually costs at that income level. She had her own rented room in a boarding house near her office. She was not looking to be rescued. I noticed that specifically. In the months that followed, dinners at Larjan BBQ near Fuente Osmeña, where the open-air grill stalls fill the whole block with smoke and noise, walks along the South Road Properties Boulevard, a day trip to Mactan Island, she always reached for her wallet. I was embarrassed by it given the gap in our circumstances, but I found it genuinely charming. She told me early on, and without apology, that she sent 5,000 pesos a month to her mother. Nanay Caring, 64, retired, living in the family house in Barangay Umapad, Mandaue City, the dense industrial city directly north of Cebu, connected by the Mandaue-Mactan Bridge. She had an older brother, Robert, 44, who drove a delivery truck in Mandaue. 2 sisters, Mylene, 37, married and living in Cebu, and Joy, 31, working at a call center. This was not a complicated family portrait. It was a normal Filipino working family. Lenny laid it out plainly. This was her life. These were her people. The 5,000 pesos a month was not optional, because family is family. That's just what we do here. I heard that sentence and filed it as a reasonable and admirable fact. I did not yet understand that the sentence family is family, in a Filipino context, does not have a fixed outer boundary. She told me what she cost before I asked. I thought that meant she was different. And she was. It just didn't mean what I thought it meant. The first request came in month 5, and I want to describe it honestly because I would make the same decision again, and I think most people reading this would too. Lenny's mother was hospitalized at Vicente Soto Memorial Medical Center, the main government hospital in Cebu, theoretically free for indigent patients under PhilHealth, but in practice full of costs that fall outside coverage, specific medicines, tests, private room charges. Nanay Caring had a minor cardiac event. The total bill after PhilHealth coverage was 30,000 pesos. Lenny had covered 8,000 from her savings. She did not ask me. I offered. I transferred 22,000 pesos through GCash, the mobile wallet that functions like Venmo in the Philippines, in about 30 seconds from my BDO account. A green notification. The money was simply gone from one place and arrived in another. In Manchester, 22,000 pesos was roughly 330 pounds, a weekend away. Here, it resolved a hospitalization. 3 weeks later, Robert's delivery truck broke down. Differential bearing failure. He knew the exact cause because he'd been nursing the problem for months. Without the truck, he lost his income. He was the sole provider for his wife and 2 children in a rented house in Barangay Tipolo, Mandaue. The repair estimate was 35,000 pesos. Lenny mentioned it apologetically and said she didn't expect anything. I gave 25,000 and said Robert could cover the rest when he was earning again. I had now transferred 47,000 pesos to the Reyes family across 2 months, roughly 700 pounds, still well within my annual buffer. I adjusted my mental accounting and felt no alarm. What I did not notice, what I had no way of noticing from inside that moment, was that word had quietly traveled. Nanay Caring told the sisters mentioned it to their husbands, Robert told his colleagues. The informal network of the Reyes family had registered a data point. The British engineer pays quickly and without conditions. By the end of that month, I had a name in Lenny's family that nobody said out loud, but everyone understood. the one who helps. I thought that was a good thing to be. I didn't understand yet that it was also a job description. Month 8. My lease on the IT Park condo was up for renewal, and Lenny suggested we look for something together in Mandaue, closer to her family, lower rent, more space. I agreed. It felt like the natural progression of a relationship that had become genuinely good. We found a 2-bedroom townhouse in a gated compound in Barangay Centro, Mandaue. 22,000 pesos a month, the lease in Lenny's name because mid-market Mandaue landlords preferred local lessees. I paid. I was paying less rent for more space. Mandaue is not a tourist destination. It is a working city. Jeepneys, turo-turo carinderia stalls where you point at rice and adobo and pork sinigang through a glass case, the sound of neighbors' karaoke drifting over the compound wall on Sunday evenings. I was not floating above the Philippines anymore. I was in it. Nanay Caring started visiting 3 afternoons a week. Then she stayed for dinner regularly. Then she began staying overnight once a week because the trip back to Umapad was tiring at her age. Marcus said nothing. The house was large enough. Joy, the youngest sister, moved in temporarily after a dispute with her boyfriend. 2 weeks became 5 weeks. She left. She came back. The family had, in a way that was invisible to me because it happened incrementally, reclassified our townhouse as family infrastructure. The financial cadence had developed a rhythm by this point, 5,000 pesos a month toward Nanay Caring's expenses, formalizing what had been Lenny's contribution, now partially supplemented by me. 3,500 for a single term of school fees for Mylene's eldest son at a private school in Mandaue, not recurring, except it recurred the next term. 8,000 for Robert's wife's difficult pregnancy complication, a private obstetrician at Chonghua Hospital rather than the government facility because the government facility had a queue. I did the arithmetic for the first time in month 8 with all the numbers on the page at once. In 8 months, I'd contributed approximately 148,000 pesos to the Reyes family outside of my own relationship costs, roughly 2,200 pounds. My monthly spend had reached 82,000 pesos, 19,000 above my original budget. I had the first real conversation with Lenny about this. She didn't dispute the numbers. She said she felt ashamed. She said, "In the Philippines, when a family has someone who can help, the helping becomes expected because the need is constant and real." She didn't ask me to keep going, but she also didn't say, "Stop." I'd gone from a condo in IT Park to a townhouse in Mandaue to, functionally, the head of a family I hadn't agreed to join. The strange thing was, I didn't hate it. I just couldn't afford it. Month 13. A Sunday lunch at Nanay Caring's house in Barangay Umapad, the first time I'd been invited in a formal, ceremonial way. I understood what the invitation meant. I had been accepted. The house was concrete hollow block construction, 45 square meters, 3 rooms, shared toilet with a broken cistern, a metal roof beginning to rust at the edges. Lenny grew up here. Nanay Caring had lived here for 30 years. The land title was in her name but had never been formally updated, a common situation in lower-income barangay households throughout the country. After lunch, Robert mentioned, as amusing rather than a request, that the 200-square-meter lot adjacent to the family compound had just come available. A neighbor was selling. 850,000 pesos, roughly 12,700 pounds at current rates, or about 16,000 US dollars. If the family could buy it, they could build a proper house, 2 stories, 3 bedrooms, a dedicated ground floor space for Nanay Caring. Robert said this quietly, almost to himself, looking at the wall. I sat with it. I already knew the law. I'd known it before I ever moved to the Philippines. Foreigners cannot own land. The Philippine Constitution is explicit on this point. Article 12 is not ambiguous. It is not a technicality. It is a hard wall. I can own a condominium unit as long as foreign ownership in the building doesn't exceed 40% under Republic Act 4726. I cannot own land. I sat with Attorney Romero in his La Hague office and went through the options. Put the title in Lenny's name, which was legally clean but practically terrifying. establish a Philippine corporation and hold land through it, which was expensive, complex, and still limited to 40% foreign equity, or a long-term lease, 50 years with a 25-year renewal, which at least created documented legal standing. Attorney Romero did not recommend option 1. He laid out the risks with the neutrality of a man who had delivered the same speech to too many foreigners to count. But Nanay Caring cried once, quietly, when I visited during the weeks I was considering this. Not dramatically, not in a way that felt staged. She spoke about her roof and her bones and how she had hoped to leave her children something solid. She had worked her whole life, and the house was still a rented hollow block box with a broken cistern. I am an engineer. I spent 31 years building infrastructure for other people's cities, drainage systems, road bridges, things that would outlast everyone involved. I felt the pull of it in a way I could not entirely reason away. I agreed to fund the land purchase. 850,000 pesos, title in Lenny's name, a written deed of acknowledgement of contribution drafted by attorney Romero. Not a property right. A documented record of my financial contribution and her acknowledgement of it. He was honest about the limitations. Contractual, not property-based. If the relationship ended and she disputed the document, my legal recourse would cost more to pursue than the money was worth. I set the construction budget at 1,200,000 pesos. 2 stories, basic but solid, reinforced concrete with proper rebar spacing. I specified this myself, old habits. Professional contractor, proper permits. I put my lawyer's number in my phone as a favorite. Then I transferred the first payment. An engineer knows when a structure has weak points. What I couldn't figure out was how to care about someone and also protect yourself from the consequences of caring. Construction began in month 14. For a while, I was in my element. I visited the site in Umapad every week. I checked the rebar, measured the concrete pours, reviewed the contractor's invoices line by line. I knew what reinforced concrete was supposed to look like. I knew when a foundation was being poured correctly and when it wasn't. For a few weeks I felt useful in the specific way I had always felt useful, not as the man with the money, but as the engineer who knew what he was looking at. The overruns began in month 15. The contractor quoted an additional 180,000 pesos for foundation reinforcement after discovering the ground beneath the lot was softer than the soil survey had suggested. I approved it. I knew it was legitimate. I'd seen the report and the numbers were consistent with what the ground conditions indicated, but it established a precedent. The budget was flexible. In month 16, the contractor requested 95,000 pesos upfront for materials, cement, rebar, CHB blocks, because prices had risen sharply. This was real. Philippine construction material costs spiked significantly in 2022 and 2023, driven by post-pandemic supply chain disruption and peso depreciation. I paid. In month 17, a cousin appeared at the site, Edgar, 28, from Lenny's mother's side of the family. He had been brought in as a site laborer. His wages came out of the construction budget. I accepted this as reasonable. Then Edgar approached me directly, not through Lenny, but directly, for a 15,000 peso advance on wages because his wife had just given birth. I gave it. I filed it mentally as a one-time act of basic decency. I did not ask myself why Edgar had come to me instead of to the contractor, or what it meant that a cousin I had never met felt comfortable asking me for money on the basis of a construction project I was funding for a family I hadn't joined by marriage or formal agreement. The total construction cost by the time the house was finished was 1,680,000 pesos, 480,000 over the original budget. Land plus construction, 2,530,000 pesos. At 2023 exchange rates, roughly 70 to 72 pesos to the pound, that was approximately 35,000 pounds. I had also, by this point, been paying the Mandaue townhouse rent plus my own living costs, plus the ongoing family support payments for 20 months. I sat down one evening and did the calculation I had been quietly avoiding. I had arrived in the Philippines with 180,000 pounds. My savings now stood at approximately 118,000. I had spent 62,000 pounds against a projected spend over 20 months of approximately 24,000. I was running at roughly 2.5 times my projected burn rate. I built a new model. If I continued at this pace, my savings would be gone before my UK state pension began at 66. I would be broke in the Philippines at 63 with no income and a house I didn't legally own. The house was beautiful. 2 stories, proper rebar, solid roof. I'd built it correctly. I just hadn't built it for myself. Month 22. The house in Umapad was finished. There was a small blessing ceremony, a parish priest from the barangay chapel, neighbors, relatives I'd met and relatives I hadn't. I stood in the doorway of the thing I had paid for and could not own, feeling something I didn't have a name for at the time. Pride and unease in proportions that shifted depending on which way I was looking. 3 weeks after the blessing, Robert came to me directly. He wanted to buy a second-hand Isuzu Elf truck, a used commercial vehicle, the kind that could carry larger loads and allow him to move from employed driver to independent operator. The truck cost 380,000 pesos. Robert had 80,000 saved. He wanted me to lend the remaining 300,000 with a repayment plan he'd worked out on paper. He presented it carefully. He had thought about it. The numbers were plausible if he secured consistent contracts. I reviewed it with the same discipline I would apply to a project budget. And then I said no, not coldly. I explained my own financial position for the first time, with actual numbers, in a way I had never done with the family before. I showed Robert the real picture, my total savings, my monthly burn rate, the gap before my UK pension began, the consequence of giving 300,000 pesos at this moment. He received this badly, not with anger, but with a slow withdrawal, a kind of hurt stillness. He had assumed, as had the broader family I now understood, that my capacity was essentially unlimited, that there was a reserve somewhere that I had been drawing from, and that the reserve did not have a floor. The idea that the British engineer might have actual, documented, non-negotiable limits did not fit the narrative they had been building around me for 20 months. The atmosphere shifted. Nane caring became quieter when I visited. Joy stopped coming around. Even Lenny, and this was what I felt most clearly, became careful with me in a way she hadn't been before. Measured, as though she was recalibrating how to relate to someone who had just revealed that he was not the person she had been relating to. I tried to explain to her that the refusal was not about Robert, not about the family, not about love. It was about survival mathematics. She said she understood. I believed that she meant it. But the family had sorted me into a different category, not the one who always helps, but the one who used to help. I had learned the hard way that in the Philippines, the word no doesn't end a conversation. It just changes what the conversation is about. Month 24. I sat in Attorney Romero's office in La Hague with every document I owned spread across his desk: SRRV card, BDO deposit certificate, GCash and bank transfer records, the deed of acknowledgement of contribution, my personal account spreadsheet, now running to 6 pages. I wanted to understand exactly where I stood. The SRRV deposit situation was the first thing we addressed. My $20,000 sitting in a PRA accredited account was not frozen, but it was structurally inconvenient to access. To retrieve it, I would need to formally cancel my retiree visa, pay any outstanding fees, and undergo a PRA exit process that takes 3 to 6 months. If I left the Philippines for more than 6 months without seeking permission from the PRA, my SRRV could be automatically canceled, and the process became considerably more complicated. The money existed. Getting to it required commitment in a direction. He restated the house situation without softening it. The deed of acknowledgement of contribution was a documented record, not a property right. If Lenny chose to sell the property and disputed the document, my recourse would be a civil claim. Expensive, slow, and uncertain. His exact words: "You contributed to the construction of a property owned by another person." In Philippine law, your claim is contractual, not property-based. I had known this when I signed the document. Hearing it stated flatly, with the financial reality of the past 24 months visible on the desk between us, was a different kind of knowing. He laid out my options. I could marry Lenny. which would not give me property rights since foreigners married to Filipinos are still constitutionally prohibited from owning land, but might create spousal rights in family law that would give me stronger standing in a civil dispute. I was not prepared to marry someone partially to protect a financial position. I could accept the situation, cut off further family contributions, renegotiate the relationship on an explicitly different basis, and try to make it work on those terms. Or I could leave, cancel the SRRV, repatriate the deposit over 6 months, return to the UK at 59 with approximately £90,000 to £95,000 and rebuild from there. I considered option 3. I ran the numbers. £95,000 stretched across 7 years until my UK state pension at 66 was £13,500 a year, £1,125 a month. In Manchester, that was a very uncomfortable life. In the Philippines, even now, even with everything, it was enough. The cruel irony that I sat with in a Starbucks in Ayala Center, Cebu that afternoon, watching young Filipino professionals on laptops, couples, families, normal life proceeding entirely normally around me, was that the Philippines still made financial sense. My relationship, as currently structured, did not. I had spent 31 years building structures that were supposed to last a century. I sat in a shopping mall in Cebu and realized I had built nothing that was mine. Before we continue, please subscribe to my channel so you won't miss any videos in the future. Month 25. A Sunday evening in the Mandaue townhouse. I had asked for a weekend without family visiting, the first time I had ever made that request in 2 years of living inside this orbit. Lenny had agreed, and the effort the agreement cost her was visible in the particular way she held herself that evening. I opened the conversation with numbers. I printed a 2-page summary. Total contributions to the Reyes family outside of relationship costs since month 5. 748,000 pesos, roughly £10,500. On top of the house, 2,530,000 pesos, £35,000, and my normal living costs. My total departure from my planned budget over 25 months was approximately £47,000. She went quiet. She did not dispute the numbers. She had known abstractly that money had moved. She had not known the aggregate, and I believed that. The individual transactions had each been handled in their own moment, in their own justification. Nobody had been keeping the running total. Until now. She said something that I have turned over many times since. In my family, asking for help is not shameful. But I think for you, being asked so much feels like being used. I don't know how to want things from you and not want things from you at the same time. That's not something I was taught. I said, I don't think you're a bad person. I don't think your family are bad people. I think you are surviving in a system I didn't understand. And I walked into it and told myself I was being generous when part of me was also buying something. I wanted to belong somewhere. Your family gave me that. And now I can't afford to keep paying for it, and I don't know what's left without it. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. It did not resolve anything, but it clarified everything. She said she couldn't stop being who she was to her family. She couldn't tell Robert and Nane Caring and Joy that the British man was no longer helping because she had chosen him over them. That was not how her world worked, and she couldn't pretend it was. She was not asking me to keep going, but she also couldn't promise that the stopping wouldn't cost us the relationship. I asked her the question I had been forming for months. If I had no money, if I had arrived here with nothing, would you have stayed with me? She took a long time. Then she said, I don't know. I think I would have tried. But I also think the family would have ended it. They would have made it impossible. And I'm not sure I'm strong enough to have fought them. That was not the answer I wanted. It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. She answered me honestly. I had asked her a question that deserved an honest answer. I just hadn't realized that honest and good news were different things. Month 27. I'm sitting on a bench at the Cebu South Road Properties waterfront, a wide boulevard along the southern edge of the city, popular with joggers and people who need to think. You can see the Mactan Channel from here on a clear day. I come here when something requires processing that my flat doesn't have the space for. I have made my decision. I am staying. But on different terms, terms that are actually mine, rather than terms I drifted into because no one ever formally presented me with a contract, and I never thought to ask for one. I terminated the joint tenancy in Mandaue. I moved into a one-bedroom condo in Barangay La Hug, Cebu City, 18,000 pesos a month, written lease, reviewed by attorney Romero. I am no longer the center of family infrastructure by proximity. I formally ended, in writing, any ongoing financial contributions to the Reyes family. My lawyer drafted a letter, not hostile, not threatening, simply documenting that my prior contributions were voluntary, unilateral, and do not create forward obligation. This was partly self-protection and partly clarity. The family had been operating on informal expectations, and informal expectations in a tight barangay community are more binding than contracts. Making the boundary legible was the only way to make it real. The house in Umapod stands. It belongs to Lenny. Nanay Caring lives on the ground floor. Robert visits on weekends. I have not been back to see it. I know it is built correctly. Proper rebar, solid foundation reinforcement, the right concrete mix ratio. I know the roof will outlast the neighborhood. I built it well. But it was never structurally mine to live in, and the legal reality and the emotional reality have finally arrived at the same address. My relationship with Lenny survives. Barely, but it does. She visits me in La Hug twice a week. We are still together in the way that two people are together after the enmeshment is gone, a smaller, quieter version of what we were. Some of the warmth left with the closeness. I don't know yet whether what remains is enough. I think it might be. I am trying to find out. My revised financial position, 97,000 pounds in savings, SRRV intact and active, monthly spend back to approximately 65,000 pesos. Still above my original target, but within a range I can sustain. I have rebuilt the model. It is tighter than I would like. It works. If I maintain this pace, my savings carry me to 66 and the UK state pension begins. The margin for error is smaller than it was when I landed, but the margin exists. Here is what I would say to someone arriving in the Philippines today with a retirement plan and a spreadsheet. Understand that love in this country comes with infrastructure. It comes with a family, a barangay, a network of obligation that is centuries old and not going anywhere. The concept called utang na loob, the debt of gratitude, is not a manipulation tactic invented to extract money from foreigners. It is a genuine moral framework that governs how millions of Filipino families survive. When you help someone's mother pay a hospital bill, you have entered that framework. When you fund a house, you are the load-bearing wall of an entire family structure. Nobody explained this to you in writing because nobody needed to explain it to the other people who grew up inside it. You are not being asked to buy your way into the family, but you will buy your way into it anyway, because when real need meets real generosity, money moves. The question is not whether this will happen. The question is whether you have priced it before the first peso leaves your account, or whether you will price it later, the way I did, on a lawyer's desk at 59 with 62,000 pounds gone and a house you legally cannot own, standing in a barangay you can no longer quite bring yourself to visit. The Philippines is not a scam. It is a country where the gap between what people earn and what life costs is so wide that any foreigner with a pension becomes, structurally, an economic event. You can be generous and still go broke. You can be careful and still lose. The only real protection is honesty with yourself before you give the first peso about what you can sustain, not just this month, but over 5 years, 10 years, every year until the income you're counting on finally arrives. Price it honestly. Then decide. I'm 59 years old. I have 8 years until my UK state pension. I have a one-bedroom condo in La Hug, and a woman I meet twice a week, and a city I know better than I know Manchester now. I don't know how this ends. I am, for the first time in a long life of very careful planning, genuinely uncertain about my own future. I have decided that this is acceptable. It feels more honest than the certainty I arrived with. I came to the Philippines with a plan I trusted completely. I still live here. The plan is gone. I'm not sure that's the failure I thought it would be. That's Marcus's story. A civil engineer who measured everything and still couldn't measure what it would cost to belong somewhere. He isn't unique. Every week, men arrive in the Philippines with spreadsheets and pension plans and the entirely reasonable belief that lower costs mean less risk. What they don't price in is the cost of being needed, not by one person, by a system, by a culture built on the premise that whoever has resources shares them, and that this sharing is not charity but obligation. That's not a flaw in the Philippines. It's how millions of families survive. But it is a variable that doesn't appear in any retirement calculator, and if you don't account for it before you fall in love, you will account for it after, and the accounting is much less pleasant. If you're planning a retirement in the Philippines or you're already there, know your number, not just what you spend on rent and food, what you spend on being part of someone's life. Price it honestly. Then decide. If this could happen to Marcus, it could happen to almost anyone. Creating those videos is often stressful next to a full-time job. So if you enjoy watching my videos, then please support me by subscribing to my channel. It just shows the algorithm that you like these kinds of videos. See you in the next video.